Welcome back. Well, with so many questions being expressed, not least by Surjit on the budget maths and whether they really are likely to stack up. Let's take a look at that, see what the finance minister said as well, and then throw that entire question up to the panel. So, Ira took a look at those numbers to see what could be some of the issues with them.
Two big issues that are bothering economists and the money markets. For starters, the large size of the government borrowing program at 6.3 lakh crore gross borrowings that has already pushed up bond yields in trade today and could continue to keep market interest rates high. But even beyond that reaction on the bond markets, the fear is that the fiscal math once again may not be credible. Three issues being raised. There's a 19% increase in tax revenues which is being budgeted. That is being budgeted on account of growth which is assumed at the higher end of the 6.1 to 6.7% band which the economic survey had laid down. Now, looking at growth this year, which is likely to be 5%, a pickup to 6.7% doesn't seem very likely, at least at this stage. So if growth doesn't pick up to those levels, then tax revenues could actually be under what the government is estimating. Other than that, even if you look at the subsidy side, the government hopes to bring down subsidies by 0.6% of GDP to 2% of GDP in line with the Kelkar committee recommendations, but they are budgeting staggered increases in diesel all throughout the year, even close to the election, and they've only done an additional 10,000 crore allocation on account of the food bill. Both those numbers, there's a slight fear may not be credible. So on those two counts, again, the subsidy number could overshoot. The final issue is the aggressive numbers for divestment and spectrum auction sales which have been built in. A 55,000 crore divestment number and a 22,800 crore spectrum auction proceeds number. Both those numbers, not everybody is convinced that the government will be able to realize that kind of revenue. So on those counts, there's concern about the credibility of the fiscal mathematic and of course the government borrowing program.
Okay, Surjit, before we hear what the finance minister had to say about that, feel free to add to any other concerns you have in addition to the ones that Ira listed.
Yeah, no, just very simply that there is an argument expressed by Rajiv and others that basically, you know, we trust Chidambaram. That's what we are now reduced to. We trust Chidambaram. He will reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.8% come what may. There's only one caveat. Next year is an election year. How credible is the assumption that going into the election year, Mr. Chidambaram or UPA2 will be much bothered by niceties that we got to stick to 4.8% of GDP.
Okay, Adi Godrej about to join us and I'm going to get his take in. But Rajiv, do you want to respond to what Surjit said? Yeah. Why would you necessarily believe the finance minister next year with election pressures on his head? Why would he cut down expenditure?
So I'll say why I believe him is because I think the situation macro-wise is more serious than most of us are willing to admit. He did, the finance minister that is, admitted in his speech that the current account deficit has become a matter of serious concern. If he does not focus on fiscal consolidation, and he knows that, right? The whole debate about growth is very rapidly becoming academic. Macro stability, containing instability, preventing exchange rate volatility will become the primary drivers of policy, irrespective of electoral logic. So it depends when and if instability begins to threaten us. My sense is that I don't believe, and you know, this is a very personal judgment, I don't believe that this government should macro stability really be threatened, be so irresponsible as to go into an election with expenditure completely out of control and consequently an exchange rate that looks dangerously volatile.
Okay, Adi Godrej, so
just very quickly, exactly what I expected, exactly the situation, Rajiv, I completely agree with you. That's why I expected him to do something this year. Expenditures increasing by 16%. GDP is supposed to go up by 11%. Please tell me what will happen to the current account deficit before we get to the time when he starts cutting it down. Right. It just doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Adi Godrej, let me get you in on this debate. What is your sense, first of all, of the broad numbers that we seem to be coming up with? The 6.7% growth number, the 4.8% fiscal deficit number, or any other number that you want to talk to us about. How credible do you think all of this is? How realistic do you think it is that we'll hit these numbers?
I think first of all, the fiscal deficit containment at 4.8% is a good move. I think it's extremely important. It's also important that it be implemented as planned. I think if it is implemented, it will lead to better GDP growth. I think the expenditure plan he has put forth is growth oriented, it's development oriented, and it's inclusiveness oriented. So I think that many of the expenditure plans are in the right direction. It will help economic growth. Containment of the fiscal deficit, to my mind, is the most important objective. If that is done, clearly inflation stays under control, growth is promoted, and all the various macroeconomic ills we suffer from get contained. I think the RBI would then be able to reduce interest rates. In fact, they should. The rupee could appreciate, and overall it could create a good framework for GDP growth acceleration. The important thing is the plans must be implemented.
Okay, the important thing you're saying is that the plans must be implemented. We've been seeing what some of the ratings agencies have been saying about that. Let me quickly run through the rest of the panel and see what they think about the feasibility or the likelihood that we will actually hit these numbers. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, hit all these numbers, or do you think, or do you agree with Surjit that it could be tricky, dicey?
I think I've already said that I think it's going to be a tough challenge. I don't think it's going to be that easy. There are too many ifs and buts. There are too many caveats, and I think if it happens, wow, then I agree with Adi that growth will be a given. But I'm really concerned because I'm not seeing the right growth drivers to attain the growth. I'm not seeing the right investment triggers, or for that matter, the expenditure sort of curbing that can take place in an election year.
Okay, before I come to the rest of you, why don't I ask, let's just see what the finance minister himself had to say, because he was asked about his budget numbers, he was asked whether the math is going to stack up and whether he's going to be able to deliver on some of the things he said. Here was his response.
I think the numbers are credible. We have worked on the numbers for the last couple of months. The fuel subsidy bill is likely to be smaller because we are correcting diesel prices. We have capped LPG prices, subsidies at 9 cylinders. Therefore, there is every reason to believe that fuel subsidy will be lower this year. The normal food subsidy is expected to be about 80,000, and over and above that, for the Food Security Act, I've provided 10,000. But if the Food Security Act requires more money, we will certainly provide more money. But that is a question that has to be addressed after the Food Security Act is passed. I don't have a bill before me, so I can't really say what it will cost. Once the bill is in Parliament, it is passed in Parliament, we can do our sums again. But as I speak to you, I think we have made a correct assessment of the subsidy bills.
Okay, so he thinks it's credible, and he thinks that those numbers are correct. Subhashish, well, 10,000 for the food subsidy bill, because if you look at what some of the numbers are that have been coming out earlier, it's not saying that it's going to be 90,000, it's saying it could be 1 lakh, 1,10,000. I've even heard 1,30,000 mentioned on occasion.
Well, the food subsidy bill has to be passed, then it has to be implemented. It will go up till January, February before it is done. So obviously in this year it is not going to come up. So I'm not very disturbed about that. I think 10,000 crores is a fair enough amount that is set aside. Think about the NREGS, right? It took 2 years, then it was implemented. First year, there was huge amounts allocated that were not spent. So the same thing will happen with the food security bill, right? So
okay. Adi Godrej, on the question of subsidies, one of the other areas where industry and India Inc. have been looking for a lot of changes, are we seeing some changes? For example, this movement away from the traditional way that food subsidies have been done, perhaps more emphasis will be coming up after the food security bill on food subsidies. Are these steps in the right direction?
Well, clearly subsidies are coming down. I think the fuel subsidy itself will come down very considerably next year because they are taking monthly increases in diesel prices. If you look at that, there will be huge savings in terms of fuel subsidies. Also, if you look at global commodity prices, the way they are moving, crude oil prices could be coming down next year. Of course, one can't be certain of that. So overall, I think the subsidies will be contained very considerably. Also, he has tremendous opportunities in terms of disinvestment. The point is, we must start disinvestment from April onwards, not wait till the last quarter of the year. And we shouldn't allow the various ministries involved in saying this is not the right time in the market and that's not the right time. You can't play the market. Once a disinvestment target is agreed to, it should be done on a regular basis. I think if they can follow that discipline, I think certainly the fiscal deficit can be contained.
Okay, Mr. D.D. Rathi, let me get you in. If there were one aspect of the numbers around the budget that you would be concerned about, what would it be? The subsidy number, the tax number, the disinvestment number, what would concern you?
See, let me first point out this, that there are several positives in the budget, but most important thing is fiscal management. I don't think fiscal management is a choice before the government. It's just the need of hour, it is a compulsion. There will be utter mess if these numbers are not adhered to, because there is a big threat of rating downgrade. If there is a rating downgrade, you can say, huge reduction in a foreign investment inflow, which is very critical to CAD. So I think government is very well aware of that. When we have a difficult time, what we do is, first thing we have to set a ambitious or reasonable target which need to be achieved, and then we have to work around it. It cannot be other way around, that you just see what you can achieve and be contented with that. I have very strong feeling that because it is need of the hours, something more which is not outlined in the budget will also be done during the course of the year to achieve this 4.8% fiscal deficit target, and they will definitely like to bring down the current account deficit. Coming to disinvestment, as Mr. Godrej rightly pointed out, that is a matter of pricing. If you think that I'll sell everything at the optimum price and wait till March, it can't be achieved. But once you reconcile to a realistic price, I think this investment is very much achievable. Similarly, spectrum auction. Now, you set very ambitious price irrespective of how the telecom companies are going to make money, the auction won't succeed. But moment you go back to realistic price, and that may mean that amount may be cut down by a smaller percentage, I think it is still feasible. So you can have these other revenue measures subject to plus minus 10%, let us say. Similarly, if the midterm correction is required to achieve 4.8% target of deficit, it can be done. And CAD of course will remain how you build your investment climate. I think need of the hour is growth, which has been acknowledged by Finance Minister in several of his paragraphs. Similarly, need of the hour is to bring back the investment climate, because otherwise we'll be putting into suspect entire growth in the future. So I think, and everything depends on fiscal management. So I'm quite hopeful and rather optimistic that this will be achieved. Maybe it is difficult to say whether it will be based on these budget numbers or there will be mid-course correction.
Right. All right, can I just come to you, Ketan Dalal, and ask you on the tax numbers themselves. Is there anything that stands out to you which makes you feel, well, let's remember last year what the budget said our tax revenues are going to be and what actually turned out were absolutely miles apart. So is there anything in what he's forecasting now that makes you doubt it a bit?